Hi, this is FJ DeSanto. You're listening to the FSF PopCast.
The show that makes you wish it was half as long and twice as funny.
Our show is brought to you by our charity sponsor, the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund, which supports the Wish Upon a Teen Foundation that helps out sick kids when they need it most. And just imagine the comfort you'll give Red Shirt crewman number 134. You'll know that when he puts on the red shirt and joins Optimus and the Autobots in their fight against the Decepticons, that he didn't leave his family destitute and without hope, because the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund has his back, and what's left of his oil change.
All right, guys, our guest today is a producer and writer who has spent much of his time in the nerd world, because, you know, we're nerds and we like nerds, with many projects in the Transformers area. He's worked on Tekken, Constantine, and just a few of the projects that this man has worked on and as a writer or producer. And from what we have been told, he is quite the Star Wars fan / historian. So we're going to test him a little bit on that later in the show and see how that goes. But anyway, let's take a moment to welcome FJ DeSanto to the FSF PopCast. Welcome to the show, FJ.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And don't ask me anything about the EU, because I know nothing about the EU.
Well, I guess that cancels out all 5 questions we were going to ask you later. No, I'm just kidding. Just 4 of them. It'll be okay.
All right, good.
He's going to do really good on that one question. All right. So recently we talked with Kyle Newman, director of one of my favorite movies and always part of my Star Wars timeline rewatches. And of course, the movie is Fanboys. I'm a huge fanboy of the movie Fanboy. But Kyle said that we should talk to you for 2 reasons. Number 1, you're super cool. And number 2, that you're a massive Star Wars fan.
Well, now I'm glad I paid for lunch when I saw him the other day.
Well, see, there you go. He's talking so nice about you. And
yeah, well, he earned it. He earned the sushi.
There you go, right? All right, so FJ, tell us what got you interested in Star Wars. Where was your entry point into the universe, and what keeps you coming back to the galaxy far, far away?
I got lucky. I was the right age for New Hope when it first came out in the 70s. And, I was like 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old. And, I remember I did the early bird special with the toys even before I'd seen the movie and all that stuff. And I'm pretty sure I saw it opening night or at least opening weekend. And I remember, the early bird special didn't have Han Solo in it. So I thought, oh, this guy, Luke Skywalker, looks really cool. He's got the yellow laser sword and all this stuff. And then I went to the movie and I was dead into it. And then Han Solo showed up and I felt my brain rewiring into becoming a snarky asshole. You know what I mean? Like it's one of the few times, where something genuinely, you can remember the moment where your life genuinely changed, in a way that wasn't traumatic. And up until then I was a Trekkie, and I still am, but like I mean, it's weird to remember a world where there was no Star Wars yet. And but that was the moment. I mean, that just, and I think there was something so genuinely pure about that moment that makes it so, all these years later, I can't hate anything Star Wars. Like I don't get riled up, and I'll criticize stuff and all this stuff, but I'm like not going to sit there and be like, oh, I'm done or I'm out. Like someone, like I'm on the, I pop on the Rebel Force Radio podcast a lot, which is all thanks to Kyle. And there's like a Facebook group, and they just like crap on everything, and I just respond like a total meanie. I'm trying not to, because you said it was family friendly. Just be like, what's your problem? Like, I hope Lucasfilm goes away, and I hope Disney dissolves. It's like, dude, shut up. Like, it's just, like they announced the Rey movie today, and so many of my contemporaries like, and I'm like, you don't understand. There's a whole generation of kids who have now spent 10 years with that character. They're going to want more. It's like, it's like last year when we got sort of prequel nostalgia with Obi-Wan and Anakin and those flashbacks in Obi-Wan.
That was
right?
Great.
And that was what I was mentioning offline. My nephew is now 25. His first movie-going experience of the prequel. So he doesn't know them as, it's just 3 movies. He knows them as 6 movies. And then there's a whole generation going to know them as 9 movies. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I can't get riled up about something that has brought so much good to my life.
Yeah, I feel much the same, honestly. It always kills me when people, especially with today, the announcement of the Rey movie. I'm so hyped for that.
All you got to do is make it good. That's my logic. It's like, do whatever
just give
you
it
want.
quality.
If it's good, no one's going to complain. Like, it's fine. Like, who
Exactly.
cares? You know, that kind of
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah, just make sure it's quality. If you, as long as there's quality attached to it, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
And there was the other announcement of Filoni getting a movie, and I'm super excited about that.
No.
And yeah, it was the announcement of Filoni getting a movie and comparing it to Marvel's Avengers going after Thanos, and I'm kind of excited to see what that means and what all that's going to happen with that. But yeah, so I'm a massive Star Wars fan, and we could probably just sit here and just talk and riff all night about Star Wars, but you know, but yeah, I could just honestly, it's kind of
No,
my
I feel
world.
you.
90% of the Funko Pops back over here are all Star Wars,
On the
so
other side of this screen are a bunch of it's a Krennic and a Donnie Yen one. Like, there's all these
Mhm.
Rogue One ones for some reason. I don't know where the other ones are. They're probably in the office somewhere. But yes, no, I feel you. We're in good company here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. So, as I was looking through your IMDb, you are a producer of quite a few things. And
Mhm.
so I was wondering, what was your origin story of, because we're nerds and we like backstories, what got you to be a producer or a writer? Like, how did you get to be doing that?
I grew up a comic book, Star Wars, Star Trek, Transformers, probably in that order. I was a big DC Comics fanatic also. Um, and again, talking about fortuitous age of sort of growing up when DC started to do stuff like Watchmen and Dark Knight and
Hmm.
all that stuff. Like comics grew up with me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Killing Joke, things like that, where it's like just when you would normally age out of comics or something like that, they were doing these, a little more contemporary and mature things. I'm just doing this sort of set the table for it. But I loved movies. I was an Indiana Jones freak, all the classic stuff, the 80s and all that stuff. And I went to film school because I wanted to make movies. So I went to NYU. I'm a native New Yorker, and my dream was to make movies. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to direct them, produce them, write them, and I sort of learned interning a lot. For a company called Sandal, which had made the Buffy movie and then subsequently the show and all these. That I liked development and I liked working with writers and things like that. And then I reached a point, where I had about a year left in school, and I said, well, I got to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And again, we had internet, but it was dial up and there weren't things like IMDb and stuff like that.
Right.
So there used to be a thing called the Hollywood Creative Director, which was a book that was sort of like every sort of company in Hollywood and their staff and all that stuff. And what I would do is, and I was a diehard, like I mentioned, diehard New Yorker. I didn't want to leave New York. I didn't want to go to LA, where I've been now for 9 years. And but I was able to stretch it out as long as I could staying in New York, because I found out that the executive producers of the Batman franchise had an office in Manhattan. A guy named Michael Uslan and his partner Ben Melniker, and they were the guys who in the late 70s got the rights to Batman and went on sort of this 10-year odyssey to sort of, that led to the Burton movie and subsequently the movies after. And like I mentioned, I'm a Batman fanatic, in particularly Dick Grayson fanatic. There's a bunch of original art over here that's all Dick Grayson. There's I have Alex Ross Dick Grayson piece. I have Jim Lee Dick Grayson piece. I love Teen
Awesome.
Titans. That was my jam, because again, perfect timing. I was 10 years old when Marv Wolfman and George Perez did, rebooted Titans, and then destroyed my head. So anyway, I wrote Michael and Ben a letter basically saying, hey, I'm the guy who should come work for you. I love DC Comics. I know Batman inside and out. I'm in film school. I want to learn more about the business, all that stuff. And, and I was sending my resume and sort of letter to tons of companies in Manhattan. And just bizarrely, they wrote me back. Michael wrote me back. And it wasn't like a form letter. It was like, you know, telling his story and all that stuff, and don't give up. It was very, positive, which I still have. And it was, at the bat signal, the letterhead, and all that stuff. Super cool. But he said, and he said, I'll keep your resume. We don't have anything now. You're still in school, but I'll keep your resume on file. And son of a gun, he's the only person who ever actually kept the resume on file. Because a year later, I'd been out of school about 6 months. They called me and said, come in for an interview to be the assistant. And I was like 20, 21 years old, maybe a little, something like that. And I walked in, and then an office, like I said, right in Times Square in Manhattan. And there was all this beautiful comic art on the wall. And Ben, Michael's partner, who's old gone, he died a couple of years ago, he's 102 years old. He retired originally the year I was born and just came out of retirement to do this Batman thing for fun, and it turned into another, 30 years of his career. But he was a business guy. He was the vice president, general counsel, MGM. He greenlit movies like Dr. Zhivago, 2001, like he real big deal. And I learned everything about the business from him subsequently. And he showed up to work, jacket and tie, suit and tie every day. And Michael was late because Michael was always late. And I said, "Oh my God, sir, all this beautiful comic art on the wall." He said, "You know all this stuff, right?" And I said, "Yeah, that's a Neil Adams Batman. That's a Joe Kubert Hawkman. I can name Gil Kane Green Lantern piece, like all original stuff because Michael grew up a comic fanatic. He knew everybody, right? And meanwhile, what I didn't, and the old man was like, "Yep, yep." Meanwhile, I had no idea. The old man didn't know who any of that was. I said, "Well, oh, that was a Nick drawing, or or a Tim drawing." The old man would have said, "Yeah, like I was." But then Michael comes in, and he's wearing a tie, which was a rare thing because he was always very casual. But he was going to a meeting, and the tie had all the headshots of all the Marvel heroes on it. And I said, "Oh, that's a great tie, sir." I was very, very polite. And he goes, "You know these characters?" And I started to name all the characters: Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Mr. Fantastic, Ghost Rider, or whoever the hell was on the tie. And they went. And by the way, I was the first interview. There were like 5 kids waiting outside to come in and interview. And they said, "Oh, you got the job." I said, "What? You got the job?" I said, "Well, what about
Cool.
these other kids?" They go, "No, we always wanted to give it to you. We just want to make sure you weren't like one of these lunatics we meet at Comic-Con or something like that. Like you seem normal and all that." So, and I got the job, and I worked for them for over 10 years. And 8 of those years were like the years where they didn't know what to do with Batman, like after Batman and Robin. And so I was there for the first 2 Nolan movies. And when I say I was there, I'm saying literally junior guy eavesdropping on anything related to it. Like, I don't want to make it seem like I was involved with it and all this stuff, even though I got like crew jacket and I got to read the script and all that shit. But the first movie I ever worked on, sort of soup to nuts, was a movie they had put together at Warner Brothers called Constantine with Keanu Reeves, which was a blast to work on. That was absolutely like, on being on set. And that was the first time I spent a lot of time in LA, and Keanu was really nice, and a great director, Francis Lawrence. And again, junior guy, assistant to the producers, started watching how everybody did that, producers like Lawrence Schuler Donner and all this stuff. And then so that was the first movie I ever worked on. And then there were the Nolan Batman movies. Like I said, I didn't really quote unquote work on them, just sort of watch them unfold from behind the scenes. And I'm sort of jumping ahead a lot, but the first movie I was a producer on was a movie called The Spirit,
Right.
which was based on the Will Eisner books, which Michael and Ben had the rights for like 20 years. And subsequently, Frank Miller wrote and directed it, which now, again, for me as a DC Comics kid, to spend 2 years with Frank Miller was like heaven. Like he and I got along really well. We're still like his whole gruff exterior is, very public. When, like I literally, I'm not joking, would sit in Albuquerque where we shot the movie. We'd be in a Wendy's literally for hours talking about the Legion of Superheroes, or some insane thing like that. And the movie, it's okay. It wasn't successful, but it was a great experience for me because it's, first name as my name as a producer on thing and all that stuff. And then subsequently I realized I had been with Michael a long time, and Ben had semi-retired, and I said, let me go out on my own. And that was the first sort of chapter of my career, in a nutshell. But the byproduct of that was Michael being a comic book historian. I got to meet all the greats, from Bob Kane to Will Eisner to Joe Simon.
Wow.
And that also ingratiated me at DC Comics. We spent a lot of time there with like Paul Levitz, and Jeanette Kahn was running it when I first started and all that stuff. So I got to really learn that world really well, and eventually started writing comics and stuff. That's how I met Jim Lee, who's one of my dearest friends, and just fell into that world. That was like a byproduct. of the gig was Michael was a great person to hang out with to get original comic art because everybody always gave him discounts. That's how I got everything.
Nice.
Excellent. All right, well, cool. That's a cool coming up story. Definitely a lot of connections there. That's awesome.
No, I was really lucky. It was like
Yeah.
that can't be replicated. That experience can't be replicated. If that makes sense.
Not at all. All right, so let's talk about some of your future experiences moving past that point. Now, for some people, when they fall into working in a universe, it's either because that's just where their career path kind of led them over time, or they had a direct line of sight that this is where they wanted to go, this is how they wanted to do it, things along those lines. Now, you have had an opportunity to work on, at least from what I could see on IMDb, which is not always accurate, at least 4 of the Transformers animated miniseries as a writer and producer. So
Yeah, I did 6. I worked on 6 in different 6 seasons, I guess technically.
okay.
So the if you want the origin story of that was, I got a call one day from a writer friend of mine who said, "Hey, they're going to do a digital anime, like a digital web series anime based on Transformers." And I spent a lot of time in the other secret part is I'm a huge manga and anime fanatic.
Okay.
Again, the third time I'm going to bring this up, being the right age when anime first came to the US in the late 70s. Yamato, which everybody knows as Star Blazers, and Gotcha Man, which is Battle of the Planets, Macross, which everybody knows as Robotech. Like that was like my holy trinity. So fortunately, in my previous life with Michael, I spent some time in Japan and got to know that industry, like the manga and anime industry. So I had experience working in Japan. In fact, my first job or freelance job after I left them was consulting and developing stuff for Japanese companies, like their properties and stuff like that. Like I did a book called Cyborg 009, which is based on a very classic thing, and I was working for the rights holder for that. That's how that came to be. And then so the idea was like this Transformers anime was going to be produced in Japan, so they felt my experience would be helpful. But also, like when I sort of listed the things I love, Transformers was sort of the 4th or 5th thing. So I didn't have like a serious knowledge outside of G1 like I do Star Wars or Trek and
Okay.
all that stuff. So like I was like a G1 guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, sorry, I'm just moving this a little bit. And what happened was, I got brought in to be the guy who knew the least to balance out the nerds on the writing staff. So like the guy would sit there and go like, it doesn't matter that Optimus Prime made a right at this corner in some episode 1986, right? Like what's going to drive the story? So I got involved with Combiner Wars was the first one.
Yeah.
And long story short, there was a showrunner involved with that show who had a bit of an ego and sort of gutted the show and sort of decided he was going to do what he wanted with it.
Yeah.
And subsequently, when the first season was finished, fired everybody off the show. Fired the writers, fired me, fired everybody. Because he thought he was going to direct it. He thought he was going to do all this shit. And I thought, oh, my time with Transformers is over. Like, that's it. And subsequently, like 6 months later, in the middle of the second season, you find out the guy has completely tanked second season. And I get a phone call from somebody at Warner Brothers, because they own Machinima, saying, hey, can you meet on a weekend? And I said, oh, something's up. And they said, we're firing him on Monday. Can you start on Tuesday and be the new showrunner of the second and third seasons? And I went, sure. And I had never showrun anything in my life, let alone animation,
Mm-hmm.
So I got really sort of thrown into the fire on that one, because the second season was mostly in production. It was a disaster. And if you've ever watched them, like the third season is very, very different, because we were able to sort of get a little control over that one and sort of steer it more towards the toys. Like he didn't, like the previous showrunner, like didn't care what toys they were using, all that stuff, like how to match it with the brand and all that stuff. And we did the third season, because that had like Volcanicus in it and all that stuff, like, oh, they're actually making toys of these things. And, but what was sort of great about it, the Prime Wars trilogy, which creatively I think is a mess. And, now that I'm no longer doing it in Transformers, I can sort of come out and say these things. It was a disaster creatively.
Okay.
But what it was an education on how to make anime, how to produce anime. But it was also a master class, if I may, behind the scenes. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say master class, like an education is a better
Yeah.
word, on how to handle Hasbro and what they're looking for to do with these shows. So subsequently, when those shows were over or about to end, the third one was about to end, Hasbro said, look, we like you, we like Machinima, and they had no idea Machinima was about to get dismantled in the Warner Brothers merger. But they were like, we want to do more, but we don't want to do web series. We want to do like a Netflix show. And then the timing of that was just bizarre because I just sold Tekken as an anime with Machinima to what was the brand new Netflix anime group. So it was a very easy
Okay.
phone call to Japan and say, do you guys want to do Transformers? And they went, yeah, as long as it's not the thing you're doing now. I said, no, I want to do a whole new thing. And Hasbro, I had signed a bunch of NDAs and I spent a lot of time in Rhode Island dealing with them, had sort of given me the sort of framework of what those three, what War for Cybertron was going to be. The first one was, hey, it's called Siege. It's Band of Brothers on Cybertron. Second one's called Earthrise. Third one's called Kingdom. It's going to be the Return of Beast Wars, but don't tell anybody. And I was like, oh, geez. Like I could do something with this because the idea was like it was a prequel to G1. So I was like, yeah, that's the stuff I know. So bizarrely, in the sort of 5 or 6 years on Transformers, I was the guy who was hired to be the guy who knew the least, to being like the ultra protective, like, don't mess with Transformers kind of thing. Like it was like this evolution of what it was. But that's how I got involved with it. And Netflix, to their credit, automatically greenlit 3 seasons just based on me telling them what it was. And I had an animation studio called Polygon out of Japan who were friends of mine who had done Robots in Disguise and a couple other things. They had won some Emmys for it. They'd done Clone Wars and all that stuff. And
Cool.
And I just walked in and said, I want Polygon to do it. And Polygon had done a bunch of stuff for Netflix already. So it was look, the easiest sale of my life was just sort of like, yeah, Transformers and Polygon. They went, okay. And then it took them, 8 months to figure out the deals and all that stuff. While I just sort of sat there finishing the third Power of the Primes and all that stuff. And the irony being, we hired Ron Perlman to play Optimus Primal, and now he's Optimus Primal in the live action features. So it's like, you're welcome for the paycheck, Mr. Perlman.
Nice.
There you go. That's cool. I do find it funny that you were brought in to be the opposition to the nerds because, yeah.
Not the opposition, the balance.
Yeah, the balance is probably
get lost
a better
in
way
the
to say it.
weeds on this nerdy stuff, and
because
push it forward.
Yeah, because even in the Star Wars stuff we were talking earlier, instantly I just started thinking about the people who are like, well, people are picking apart the Sabine the new Ahsoka trailer that dropped today, because Sabine's hair is too long and it's the wrong color.
Shut up with that stuff.
And
it's the worst.
So, and I'm not entirely, sold on the casting just yet, but Nick and I were talking about this right before you came in. And I said, but I know it's going to grow on me. The more I see the person, in live action, it's going to grow on me.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like when the first time you see Rosario as Ahsoka, it's like jarring, and then you ease into it. And it'd be one thing, the only solace I take in that is Filoni's the one doing the casting.
Yeah.
And he created these characters. He created these characters. So there is a certain amount of respect and trust you have to give him.
Oh, absolutely.
For doing that. It'd be one thing if it was somebody else off running it and they just picked who they thought it was, but it's like, no, the guy who created the characters. How rare is that?
Exactly.
That the guy who created the characters is going to have the opportunity to sort of expand what he's built.
Mm-hmm. In Filoni we trust. So, we'll move forward from there. But
so we definitely all have a lot of things that are close to our hearts, and you probably definitely have worked on things that aren't even on the IMDb list. What was a project that was close to your heart that you wish had gotten a little more love?
Oh, it's definitely Cyborg 009. Because we did a great sort of graphic novel for a beautiful hardcover book that came out in Japan the same day as the US, which had never been done before. And to be honest, it was a labor of love, but it was also a Trojan horse with the idea of trying to sell it as a movie or TV show here in the US, because in my line of work, you can't walk into a studio with 25, 30 volumes of manga and say, hey, the story's in here. So a buddy of mine, a guy named Brad Cramp, who was a producer on like Gattaca, Lord of War, like really like high-end sci-fi stuff. He and I sort of had written the cyborg treatment, for a feature that eventually became the graphic novel, with the idea of we could, get a movie deal for this. And we did. We got offers on it. And subsequently the rights holders in Japan had a regime change that they didn't want to do an international production. Like they were scared of what would it do to their, property and all that stuff. So that's, and there's always still like, how do I get that back? How do I do that? Whatever, like everything, it's a long shot. But that's sort of my, white whale, I guess.
Gotcha. Did you have any dealings with the Netflix series?
No.
Okay.
No. No, I didn't do any series other than the only thing I did was the book.
Okay.
We had developed like an Ishimori. So it was created by a guy named Shotaro Ishinomori, who is like the Stan Lee of Japan. He created Kamen Rider, the original concept of what becomes Power Rangers, like the Super Sentai team of
Okay.
colors. Like he created that, like the basis of Power Rangers, all that stuff. And I worked for about 4 years for his company. He passed away years ago, but for the people that owned it. And they were developing stuff in Japan, like the shows that are on Netflix. And there's a thing called Recyborg, which they were doing at the same time as us, which the divisions within the company saw as competition and didn't like what we were doing. So it's always tricky to sort of, with manga and anime, sort of bringing it here and stuff like that. There's always a curveball or something with that. But yeah, I wish I did a show. I developed an animated show for it. With Peter Chung, who created Aeon Flux.
Okay.
And it never got off the ground. He did great concept art somewhere on a hard drive somewhere, but it never got traction, unfortunately. For a number of reasons.
Well,
there's a shot to my memory.
Yeah.
I am familiar with Cyborg 099 or 009, right?
009, yeah.
009. So like I would appreciate it if something like that came out, but
yeah, what's fun about that is it's an international cast. It's very relevant in terms of the world we live in. It's people from different countries coming together. It's got a real air of positivity to it. It was so ahead of its time for something created in the 60s.
Yeah.
The problem with adapting a lot of manga and anime is, the characters are inherently Japanese, whereas Ishimori had a broad worldview where, there are 9 cyborgs in this thing. They all come from a different country. They're all different genders, colors, etc. It was great. It was, and again, it's a spirit of cooperation, spirit of positivity, which I always loved about it. And it, with real drama and real stakes to it. The people plucked from their lives, turned into these machines and stuff like that. And it was entertaining and fun. And I think it could speak to a real international audience if it's done right.
Very cool. All right. So one of the things that we've come to, over the course of doing this show and talking with we have 128 episodes posted currently.
Oh, that's great.
And we got a bunch that we're getting out, working on editing and getting out. But one of the things that we've noticed in talking with all of you really creative people is that burnout is just as much of an issue for you guys, sometimes even more so, because you're pouring so much of yourself into a project and you're working so hard to get this thing creatively done, and it can be burn you out emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, all those things. So being a writer and a producer, that definitely counts you as a creative person. So what do you do in between jobs or projects to keep your batteries charged? Like, do you like power nap? Do you read books? Do you do underwater basket weaving? What's your thing?
No, it's different when you're working in a world on things that you already have an inherent love for. So it's a little easy. I mean, for me, the escape is music. Play music.
Okay.
Watch a lot of soccer.
Okay.
And things like that. That keep that sort of distance, but keeping your brain engaged, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But so for example, like Transformers was a perfect experience. I mean, it had headaches like any project does. But like on the flip side, Tekken was a nightmare to produce. It was dealing with video game people who don't understand entertainment and, have their own vision of it and butting heads a
Sure.
lot. That was a really frustrating project to work on. But, on the flip side, it's like, the alternative is not working on these things in this world and stuff like that. And there is a certain privilege to it.
So we have a Facebook group that has over 210,000 members,
Get out.
and it just exploded, and it's just filled with memes and a lot of Batman memes. So because you're a big Batman fan, where would you drop Batman? Like, what universe would you like to see Batman dropped into?
Are you talking about film or comic?
Ooh.
Sure. Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. If you have a preference of one over the other.
If it's comics, a little easier. For me, my prime golden era of Batman that I fell in love with it and blew my mind was Steve Englehart and Marshall Rogers in the 70s. Joker Fish, Silver St. Cloud, all that stuff. And I got really lucky. I have a Marshall Rogers commission of Robin that he did for me about 6 months before he passed away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's one of my prized possessions because, like I said, back in the day when I was working for Michael, he was a big comic art collector, so he knew everybody, all the dealers, and how to haggle and all that nonsense. And I always wanted pieces from the stuff I loved as a kid, right? But none of the Marshall Rogers stuff ever has been on the market, other than the occasional cover, which couldn't afford anyway. So eventually I tracked down his art dealer and got him to do a commission because there wasn't going to be a piece of original art, So luckily I got it.
Okay.
So yeah, that's my era. That's, I think it's collected as something called Strange Apparition or something like that.
Okay.
Just gorgeous artwork.
But if you were to put Batman in a different universe, for the Batman of that era, into a different fandom or universe, where would you drop him and why?
Well, I don't know. I hate mixing things up.
Okay.
I don't know why. I think, though I'm a big like Earth 1, Earth 2 fan. Like I love Earth 2. I love JSA, and Earth 2 Robin in particular is my favorite.
Okay.
But
it's a fair answer.
Like I always hated these like someone would do an art commission of the Enterprise, the USS Enterprise and the Millennium Falcon meeting. It's like, I don't want that. No, I don't want that. Like, keep that all away from each other. You know what I mean? Like, don't mix up those worlds.
You would hate a lot of the memes in our group then.
Then I'm not joining. Forget it.
No, there's a lot of good ones in there too. There's we got a lot of fun people in our group who post some really cool stuff, and we have some fun conversations too. So, all right. So, like I warned you at the beginning, Kyle Newman talked you all up and how much Star Wars trivia you knew. So we've got 5 questions here. We're going to run you through.
It's going to be tough.
So some of these questions are the same exact questions that we gave to Sam Witwer when we had Sam on the show.
Poor Sam. Don't do that to him.
The difference is, now I'm just going to tell you, Sam was answering some of these questions before we could finish them because he's Sam.
But you see, the problem is I usually go to them, people like him and Kyle, for answers. Like they tell, like, what's this? And they're like, well, you got to read this novel. And I'm like, oh, okay. For me, it's it's the movies and the animated shows, and that's it. That's my Star Wars.
I get you. All right.
So I'm going to embarrass myself.
Well, I can tell you right now, none of the questions are from the EU, so you're going to be okay.
I'm still going to embarrass myself. But okay.
I think you'll do better than you think you do. All right, go for it, Nick.
It's okay. I don't know some of these answers.
No, good.
Actually, the correct answers aren't marked.
Yeah, I know. I'm doing that right now. You're welcome.
In The Empire Strikes Back, which bounty hunter wears a uniform from Doctor Who? Is it Boba Fett?
That's Bosk, right?
Yep, you are correct.
Okay.
All right.
I'm not that bad.
You're going to do okay. You're going to do okay. All right. Princess Leia tells Grand Moff Tarkin the rebel base is located on what planet? Tatooine, Dantooine, Okay,
Yeah,
there you go.
Dantooine.
Dantooine. I was going to try and throw you off with a Tatooine, but alas,
Who
that it did not get thrown off.
who wiped out all of the information about Camino from the Jedi Temple archives?
Why did
Was it
Cypher Diaz? Or no, it's Dooku or Cypher Diaz. I don't remember how they actually explain that.
you want your multiple choice?
Yeah.
All right, we got Darth Sidious, Count Dooku, or Darth Maul.
No, it's Dooku.
Yep.
There you go. So you're 3 for 3 so far. You're doing really well.
Oh,
So,
these are good. These are good questions. Like they're not too easy, but they're in my range. That makes sense.
well, thank you for not calling them too easy. I do appreciate that. All right. On Darth Vader's chest plate, there's a phrase that reads, "His deeds will not be forgiven until he merits." In what language is this written?
Is it Auerbash?
No. Is it Huttese, Swahili, or Hebrew?
Oh, I don't know. That I don't know.
Want to take a guess?
Hebrew? Is it Hebrew?
You're
It is
4 for
Hebrew.
4. All right.
Oh shit, that's great. I didn't know that for some reason.
All right, last one. This popular word in the Star Wars universe is never said in any Star Wars movie. Is it A, Kashyyyk, B, Ewok, or C, Toydarian?
That's a good question. What was the second one? It's Kashyyyk? What's the
Kashyyyk,
second one?
Ewok, and Toydarian.
I think Ewok.
Yes, you are correct.
Yeah, because I remember Yoda saying, "I'll go to the Wookiees on Kashyyyk." I remember somebody said it in Revenge of the Sith.
Yep.
And then to Darian, I remember that's Watto, isn't he?
Yeah.
One of them.
I'm a Toydarian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it did
Your
say
worst Watto
any
impression ever.
Star Wars movie. Did that include like the Ewok Adventure?
Oh, don't get into that Caravan of Courage stuff, dude.
No, Nick, we're not including those.
Okay. Well, FJ, thank you so much for being on our show today. Where can our listeners go to find out more about you and your works?
It's really easy. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all the same thing, at FJ DeSanto. That's really it.
Bingo bango.
Yeah, thanks
And
for having me.
is there anything else that people can be looking forward to?
There's some stuff that I can't talk about, but they should check out a comic publisher I'm partnered with called Vault Comics,
Okay.
which great company that is publishing some great sci-fi, fantasy, horror stuff. I've been working with them. I did a book for them called Failsafe a couple of years ago. Developed a book called Bleed Them Dry, which is about a ninja vampire in the future. That's Comic Resources called the #1 horror comic of 2020. And I'm maybe turning that into an anime. And yeah, that's it. Vault is, a lot of fun, really good stuff.
Very cool.
Excellent. And we will make sure that we put those links into our description so people can check you out and some of your works that you've worked on.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we want to remind you that subscribing is the single most important thing that you can do to help our show continue to grow and get amazing guests like FJ here today to have these amazing conversations and moments for you to laugh and listen to. So please subscribe. It helps us more than we can really ever tell you. And we want to make sure that you go check out those links down below that we're going to have posted. Go see some of FJ's stuff, what he's got coming up. You're not going to want to miss out on that as well. But if for whatever reason you're not happy with the content of our show today, you can always feel free to lodge a complaint with the head of our complaint department. That, of course, is the Spirit, the only real middle-class crime fighter. When he isn't busy bringing justice to Central City and the moon, he'll try to make time to look over your complaint. But to help expedite the process, make sure that you send in 3 copies, 1 for Sans Serif, 1 for Muffins, and 1 for the Spirit himself. We're sure that once he has time, he'll tell you that we aren't nearly as much of a threat as the octopus. After all, we're only podcasters.
That's great.
Well, thanks again, FJ.
Thank
My
you so
pleasure,
much,
guys. All right, reach out. Let me know when it's up there.
Will do. All right, guys, that's going to conclude us for the FSF PopCast. Goodbye.
Ciao.
And 3, 2, 1, we are done recording. On behalf of the rest of the hosts of the FSF PopCast, we want to thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, please contact us by means of Twitter or Instagram using the handle @FSF PopCast, or go to www.fsfpopcast.com and click on the Contact Me link. Thanks again, and hope you enjoyed the episode.
Copyright 2023 FSF PopCast.
Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF PopCast. The views expressed by the guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpopcast.com. Original music by Jordan Michaels.